In this session, we're going to spend some time talking about the free tools of architecture. As we've said in several of our other sessions, one of the sort of the common truths among projects that pertain to ministry organizations is that funds are always a challenge. And if we can pay attention to the things that don't cost very much money to bring value, both aesthetically and otherwise, to a project, we really believe that there's wisdom in that. And so today we're going to talk about what some of those things are and how we can attend to those things in a way that really brings some vitality and vigor to our projects from the aesthetic side. So we think of design as a tremendous time to build momentum for any given project. This is a time when people will get excited about the project and they'll want to see things move forward. They've contributed their ideas. They've really thought hard about the linkage between design and function in their particular ministry goals that they're hoping to accomplish. And so design can be a tremendously effective time to build that momentum. As we get into the construction tide period, one of our challenges is going to be getting to the funding stage in a way that really makes sense so that the project can proceed. I've said this in some of our other sessions, that a good percentage of the projects that BGW works on have gotten stymied by this, that they have over-designed or they've gotten too far down the road with expensive materials or expensive building systems, and they find that they hit a wall and they can't ever actually get to the construction period to get the building built. If all you get out of the deal is a really nice design that never gets built, I think we would all consider that pretty much to be a failure of a project. We want to make sure that we are getting to construction and getting the ministry tool to be employed and in a way that we can actually begin to use it to accomplish some of our ministry goals. One of our challenges is inflation. Particularly in the past 3 or 4 years, in some market areas, has been double-digit. Inflation for construction doesn't necessarily follow consumer inflation. We may have had 2 to 3% consumer inflation over the past few years, but inflation for construction seems to lurch ahead of that, and then it'll lie flat for a period of time. Maybe consumer inflation catches up at some point in time, but for the past 3 or 4 years, it's been common in the United States to see inflation be a real issue. Particularly when you're going through long periods of time to raise the money for the project. If you go through a year or two of fundraising, you can find that suddenly the project has gotten out of reach again simply due to the inflation that's happened in a particular location for construction. So it's important for us to be always counting the cost. Obviously, this is a biblical mandate for us. When you read the parable that Christ tells us, it was important enough for him to talk about the building of a tower and how the builder of that tower needs to be strongly considering what are all the aspects of the project that are going to be costing us as we get this done. It was important enough for him to create a parable around this notion. And it's important for us, too, to think about in terms of our projects, is really understanding what the cost of the project, not just the cost of the building, but the cost of the site development, the cost of the various aspects of fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, the cost of the money itself. What are some of the issues that it's going to cost us to raise money? I wish we had this quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, was one of the great 20th century architects. He happened to be a very great architect who had no idea how to control budget, and one of his phrases that became famous was, "I always challenge my clients to use predatory resources of income." And what he was saying in those words that he used, somewhat comically, is that he's going to conceive of the project, and it's your job to go out and raise all the money for my project. We want to avoid that. We don't want to create a project that gets everybody excited and moving in a common direction only to find that we hit the wall on the budget side. That's just not good for anybody. And it causes building committees and leadership to lose credibility. Of course, the architect doesn't look good in that set of circumstances. So let's all agree that we're going to count the cost, and let's employ what we call the free tools of architecture, things like color and proportion and scale and massing of the building, material choices that we make, thinking about things in terms of simple design or minimal design, and then thinking about the way that the building relates indoor space to outdoor space. These can be effective tools that don't cost very much if we give good thought in the early stages of a project. Color, by the way, is one of those things that we can utilize to maintain a sense of relevancy. Color in the United States is a little different than it's been used throughout history. Suddenly we have a vast array of colors that are available to us in almost everything. I mean, the amount of choices that we have in our clothing and our products that we bring into our household situations and the products that we have for our buildings is so much beyond where it used to be even 20 years ago, that nowadays we can utilize color in new and interesting ways. And color, by the way, is one of the things that retailers have learned to be able to churn products. So things like clothing, for instance, change over time simply because the colors go in and out of fashion. So it's an important thing for us to consider for our buildings too. Color effectively, particularly when you're talking about paint, is free. We can really energize a project with color and make that project vibrant and energetic for people to come into, whether they be children or adults, through the use of color. This particular lobby that you're seeing, or third space, uses color in a very interesting, vibrant way. Now, these colors may be able to change over time. You know, at some point in time, maybe this organization can come in and shift the way that colors are used. Maybe they want to go to a more neutral palette. But color is going to be a very effective way from a cost standpoint to bring relevancy. This is a foyer space that we did down in Florida. And at the time, I really questioned the use of this bluish material or this teal color that's used. Teal was very popular, by the way, back in the 1980s, and it kind of came back into vogue again a few years ago. And that, paired up with this terracotta color, provided a very, very pleasing color approach towards this whole lobby space. People really love to be in this space because of some of the aspects of the color of this space. So thinking about children's spaces too, the way that we can use color to draw people along the path. Again, ways that we can bring relevancy to a project and then change it over time. So that allows us to very effectively go in and make changes with very little cost. Proportion is something that we need to think about, and proportion is something that is, I think, just part of us as human beings. When Leonardo da Vinci created the universal man and came up with the proportions of the way that people relate to their space. So it's important for us to think about what proportions look good inherently and what proportions don't look bad. For some reason, for my entire career, I've thought window patterns in groups of even numbers, 2s and 4s and 6s, look odd to me. Groups of 3s and 5s bring a better sense of balance. The way that we bring wainscoting up on a wall, you know, if we bring it up halfway up in the wall, it looks incomplete. It doesn't look well thought out as opposed to 1/3 or 2/3. Those kinds of proportional things are cultural in some regards. They're also very ingrained in us as human beings, and you'll see some of these proportional concepts changing from location to location. Despite the ethnicity of a group of people, there's commonality to some of these proportions. So the way that architects have thought about this over time has been very important to composing the outside facades of buildings. Louis Sullivan, who was a very famous architect that was in the early stages of development of Chicago, when Chicago came into to its own back in the late 1890s, Louis Sullivan says form follows function. I think he says form ever follows function, but it's been shortened to form follows function, meaning you got to think about the way that the building is used and get that right, and then you can start to apply some of the things about form to it. So really understanding what the function of the building is going to be before we get into some of the more peripheral things or aesthetic things. Facility function is going to be very important. So we can solve all of the aesthetic problems, but if we don't solve function, the building will largely be considered a failure. So we want to make sure we get that right. Scale is something that's going to be very important too, is bringing a sense of scale to a building. As we approach a building, are there things that we can relate to as human beings? In this particular project, bringing down a few elements like these pergolas that project out from the facade of the building really soften the facade of this 2-story scaled building as somebody comes up to the front of this facility. So bringing elements in that bring human scale to the project is very important. You can see examples of really bad scale where you just got these crazy forms and so forth that are put together that just make no sense. Sometimes we put the largest spaces like a garage onto the front of our building, which happen to be out of scale with the rest of the building. So we bring in a large form and it looks a little bit odd. Unfortunately, a lot of this happens in our housing. Our exterior material choices are going to be crucially important. And exterior materials, by the way, come in and out of vogue. One of the things that's been very interesting to me over my career is to see the use of metal products being brought into the facades of exterior buildings. Instead of brick or more traditional materials, the use of stuccos in bold colors, whether they be synthetic stuccos like what's called an EFIS system, an exterior insulation finish system, or in natural stucco products that are employed on the use of the buildings and then skimmed over with paint products that adhere to the stucco or acrylic stucco finishes. So bringing a sense of vibrancy to the project and currency to the project, that it's a current, relevant project through the use of modern materials can be really an outstanding way to pick up the facade. So you'll see a lot of combinations that help descale the building, so it's not just a monotone building, use all one material or all one color, but you can bring different things in. This particular building happens to be in the middle of a large cornfield in central Iowa, and we took a lot of the materials that were used in some of the farm structures in the local area that were indigenous to the barns and the granaries and some of the silos. So we took large panels of metal products like galvanized metal and the ribbed metal that you're seeing in this and brought it in composition with stone and stucco in the more finished areas. You can see as you approach this building is bringing scale elements down in the facade of this building. So big, large structures didn't become imposing as people approached the project. You can see some good examples of all the things we're talking about here: color and proportion and scale. The space has really helped quite a bit by just bringing these color mobiles that are hanging down from the ceiling, or these ceiling clouds that are hanging to help the scale of the space, to bring a human sense to the space and really bring a sense of vibrancy to the space. So all of these things we can do expensively or we can do them inexpensively. Material choices make a huge impact to the cost of a building. You can really wreck a budget by choosing products that simply just cost too much money. And there's a lot of things that can be used in a very interesting way. You can choose products like this you can see in the background, where a wafer board or an OSB board was employed as an aesthetic tool. OSB board is something you use to sheathe roofing with on residential projects, but it was brought into this project to convey a sense of a textured product that can be used in a very affordable way on a wall to be an aesthetic solution. So you can see this is a good example of painted that OSB product where lanolin dyes can be applied to the product. This product, by the way, for a 32 square foot, 4 foot by 8 foot board, I was in the lumber store the other day and saw that it sells for about $11. So we're talking about a product that costs 30 some odd cents a square foot, that with the application of a little bit of uniqueness to it in terms of its color, it transitions out of your normal thinking of the way of this product into something that can be used in a very creative way. So whether that be in different forms or as an application on a wall or however that is used. Bringing the whole notion of industrial design into a project, leaving it open. Nowadays, there's an expectation that you're not going to put ceilings in and that the ceilings will remain open and evident to people walking in. 20, 25 years ago, if you walked into a building and it didn't have a finished ceiling in it, your thoughts were, what happened here? Did they run out of money? But nowadays, there's been an expectation built that we're going to leave our ceilings open. It feels more authentic to today's world. It feels more, even though it's exposed, it feels more real. And so opening space up a little bit and allowing it. Plus, it gives us the ability to make the space feel larger, which really helps in a lot of ways that we're doing things. Even something like this is a stained concrete floor that a light fixture gel was applied so that they laid down kind of a puzzle pattern using a gel that was put into a light fixture to enhance this tinted concrete raw exposed floor. Open structure you can see to the ceiling. Very inexpensive space, but vibrant and active from an aesthetic standpoint. Really a successful space in that regard. You can see other examples of incorporation of open space, but treating certain areas with drop-down ceiling elements like this, this grid system with some lighting in it that occurs to create a little sense of intimacy around that seating group, or whether it occurs over a counter when you look on the right-hand side of this photograph, and you can see how that works. Blending the indoor and the outdoor space, blurring the lines between indoor and outdoor space. This is a good example of a space that in the beginning and at the conclusion of a worship service, they can open up these overhead doors and blur the line between the indoor lobby, foyer, third place space, and then have that transitional zone to the outside that's semi-covered, even open pergola, closed pergola, some fans to make it more comfortable underneath that space, and then finally you're to the outdoor space. So it's hard to tell where the inside and the outside begin and end. Really an effective use of creating a front porch to a project. So a lot of different things that we can do when we think hard about employing the free tools of architecture to a building that don't cost very much money and give us a desired aesthetic effect to make the building relevant to people that come in.